At my graduation party, my dad toasted and said, "Let's celebrate the real success, your sister's new job." My mom nodded. My aunt whispered, "At least she earned it." I'd been quietly paying off their debt for years. That night, I pulled the plug on every account and scheduled one final email that hit their inboxes at 7 a.m. sharp. I, 26M, stood in the corner of our backyard, watching my family celebrate what should have been my moment. The diploma felt heavy in my hands as I listened to Dad's booming voice echo across the patio, raising his glass of champagne I'd paid for with money from my part-time job. Dad announced to everyone gathered that tonight wasn't just about my college graduation. It was time to celebrate the real success story. He beamed as he talked about my sister's new marketing position at some startup downtown. The crowd erupted in applause while I felt my stomach drop. Mom nodded enthusiastically, adding how proud she was that my sister had finally found her calling after years of job hopping. My aunt leaned over to her friend, whispering what she probably thought was quiet enough that I wouldn't hear. She said at least my sister had earned her success the right way, unlike some people who just coasted through school. The words hit like ice water. I excused myself and walked inside, my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone. The banking app showed the same numbers I'd memorized over the past 3 years. The joint account I'd been funneling money into had a balance of $847. Tomorrow was the first of the month, which meant the mortgage payment, car loans, and credit card minimums would hit. All payments I'd been covering while living in a studio apartment and eating ramen 4 nights a week. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family celebrated my sister's $45,000 salary, they had no idea I'd been making $78,000 from my internship that turned into a full-time remote position during my senior year. They thought I was just another broke college student getting help from mom and dad. In reality, I'd been the one keeping their house from foreclosure. It started during my sophomore year when Dad lost his job at the manufacturing plant. Mom worked part-time at a daycare, bringing home maybe $800 a month. My sister had dropped out of community college to pursue her dreams of becoming an influencer, which mostly involved expensive photography equipment and designer clothes for her Instagram posts. I watched them struggle for months before quietly stepping in. I told them I'd gotten a small scholarship that came with a monthly stipend, and I could help with a few bills. What I didn't mention was that I'd landed a lucrative internship with a tech company and was working 30 hours a week while carrying a full course load. The small help turned into paying their mortgage when Dad's unemployment ran out. Then it became covering the car payments when Mom's hours got cut. Eventually, I was paying for groceries, utilities, and even my sister's phone bill. My parents thought I was just contributing a few $100s here and there from my scholarship money. Walking back outside, I caught the tail end of another conversation. Mom was telling our neighbor about how responsible my sister had become, how she'd really matured and was ready to take on adult responsibilities. She mentioned how proud they were that both their children were finally becoming independent. Independent. The word echoed in my head as I thought about the $30,000 I'd quietly transferred to their accounts over the past year and a half. Money that could have paid off my student loans entirely. Money that could have gotten me a decent apartment instead of the converted closet I called home. My sister approached me with a drink in her hand, telling me she hoped I'd learned something from watching her success. She said it was important to work hard and not expect handouts from family. She'd always been the responsible one, she explained, and now it was my turn to figure out how to make it in the real world. I nodded and congratulated her on the job, asking about the salary and benefits. She proudly announced the $45,000 figure, adding that she'd finally be able to help Mom and Dad with some of their expenses. It was time for her to give back to the family that had supported her dreams. The supporting their dreams comment made my vision blur for a moment. I excused myself again and went to my childhood bedroom, where I kept my laptop for when I worked from their house. I sat on the bed where I'd spent countless nights balancing spreadsheets and managing their finances while they slept peacefully downstairs. Opening my banking apps, I started making changes. First, I removed my name from all the joint accounts. Then I canceled the automatic transfers I'd set up to cover their monthly bills. Each click felt like lifting a weight off my chest. I opened my email and began typing a message, scheduling it to send at 7 in the morning. I wanted them to read it with their coffee when they were alert enough to fully understand what I was saying. The email detailed every payment I'd made over the past 3 years. I attached screenshots of bank transfers, receipts for groceries I'd paid for, and documentation of every bill I'd covered. I explained that I'd been working full-time while finishing school, and that my mysterious scholarship was actually my salary from a job I'd landed through my own networking and hard work. I wrote about the nights I'd stayed awake until 3 in the morning, finishing assignments after working 8-hour days, so I could afford to keep their lights on. I described the meals I'd skipped, so they could have family dinners I paid for, but was too exhausted to enjoy. The email included a breakdown of exactly how much money I'd contributed to their household, $73,847 over 36 months. I noted that this amount could have eliminated my student debt and provided me with a substantial emergency fund as I started my career. I explained that since my sister was now the family success story and ready to take on adult responsibilities, she could take over the financial contributions I'd been making. I included a helpful spreadsheet showing their monthly expenses and suggested she might want to start with the $2,100 mortgage payment due in 4 days. Before closing the email, I mentioned that my lease was ending in 2 weeks, and I'd found a nice apartment across town. I wouldn't be available for family dinners or celebrations for a while, as I needed time to focus on my career and build the emergency fund I should have had years ago. I scheduled the email to send in 8 hours and closed my laptop. Walking back downstairs, I found the party still in full swing. Dad had moved on to telling stories about my sister's childhood, emphasizing her determination and work ethic. Mom was showing pictures from my sister's new job's orientation day, beaming with pride. My sister was holding court near the dessert table, explaining to anyone who would listen how she'd networked her way into the position and how important it was to take initiative in life. She caught my eye and waved me over, suggesting I should ask her for career advice now that she was established in the professional world. I walked over and thanked her for the offer, telling her I appreciated her willingness to help family members who were struggling. I mentioned that I was sure Mom and Dad would be grateful for her support, especially with Dad still looking for steady work and Mom's reduced hours. She looked confused for a moment, then laughed and said that was what big sisters were for. She'd always been the responsible one in the family, and now that she had a good job, she could finally help out financially. She was looking forward to contributing to the household and maybe even helping with some of the bigger expenses. I nodded and wished her luck, adding that she might want to start budgeting right away since financial responsibility was a big adjustment. She agreed enthusiastically, saying she was ready for the challenge. The party wound down around midnight. I helped clean up, loading the dishwasher with plates and glasses that I realized I'd probably paid for months ago. My parents thanked me for helping with the party setup and cleanup, mentioning how nice it was to have both their children home and successful. Dad pulled me aside before I left, telling me he hoped I'd learned something from watching my sister's journey to success. He said it was important to be self-reliant and not depend on family for financial support. He and Mom had always been proud of raising independent children, and now they could finally stop worrying about money since my sister would be contributing to the household. I agreed that independence was important and that it would be interesting to see how everyone handled the new financial arrangements. I mentioned that changes were coming soon, and everyone would need to adjust to new responsibilities. Mom hugged me goodbye, commenting on how mature both her children had become. She said it was wonderful that my sister was ready to help with family expenses, and that I should focus on finding a job and building my career. She was confident that both her children would figure out how to be financially responsible adults. I drove back to my studio apartment, thinking about the email that would arrive in 6 hours. I wondered if they'd call me immediately or if they'd spend time discussing it among themselves first. I turned off my phone, planning to keep it off for the next 24 hours. Update 1. The next evening, I finally turned my phone back on. 47 missed calls and 62 text messages. The voicemails ranged from confused to angry to desperate. Dad's first message asked if there had been some kind of banking error. Mom's voice was shaking as she asked me to call immediately because something was wrong with their accounts. My sister left 3 messages. The first one demanded an explanation for what she called my dramatic stunt. The second one asked how I expected them to pay their bills without warning. The third one, left around noon, had a different tone entirely. She asked if we could talk because she'd been looking at the numbers I'd sent, and she wanted to understand the situation better. I listened to all the messages before reading the texts. Most were variations of the same themes: confusion, anger, and requests for explanation. But scattered throughout were messages that showed they'd actually read the email thoroughly. Dad sent a text asking if I'd really been paying their mortgage for over 2 years. Mom asked how I'd managed to work full-time while finishing school. I decided to respond to one person, my sister. I sent a simple text saying I was willing to talk if she had genuine questions about the situation. She called within minutes, her voice much quieter than usual. She asked if the numbers in my email were accurate, and I confirmed they were. She wanted to know how I'd managed to earn that much money while in school, so I explained the internship and how it had developed into a full-time remote position. She was quiet for a long moment before asking why I'd never told them about the job. I explained that initially, I'd wanted to help without making them feel bad about accepting money from their college-age son. As time went on, it became clear that they preferred thinking of me as the kid who still needed their guidance while my sister was the responsible adult. She asked what I expected to happen now, and I told her the truth. I expected them to handle their own expenses like most adults do. If she wanted to help financially, as she'd mentioned at the party, that was between her and our parents. She pointed out that her salary wasn't enough to cover what I'd been paying, and I agreed that it wasn't. I suggested they might need to make some difficult decisions about their lifestyle and expenses, which was a normal part of financial planning. The conversation ended with her asking if I'd consider helping with just the mortgage while they figured things out. I told her I'd already figured things out. I was moving forward with my own life and finances. I wished her luck with her new responsibilities. Update 2. 3 days later, I received an email from Dad. It was formal and carefully written, clearly drafted with input from Mom and my sister. They acknowledged that they'd been wrong to downplay my contributions at the graduation party and that they hadn't realized how much I'd been helping financially. The email included an apology for not recognizing my achievements and for taking my support for granted. They asked if we could meet to discuss a plan for moving forward that would be fair to everyone involved. I responded that I appreciated the apology but wasn't interested in negotiating a payment plan. I explained that I'd spent 3 years sacrificing my own financial security to support their lifestyle choices, and now I needed to focus on rebuilding my emergency fund and planning my own future. I attached a detailed breakdown of my actual expenses during college: the studio apartment, the ramen noodles, the secondhand textbooks, the nights I'd worked instead of socializing. I wanted them to understand exactly what their financial freedom had cost me. 2 weeks later, I moved into my new apartment. It had a real bedroom, a kitchen with full-size appliances, and windows that actually opened. I bought my first piece of new furniture, a comfortable desk chair for my home office. Mom called that night, asking how I could afford such a nice place. I explained that when you're not supporting 3 other adults, a $78,000 salary goes much further. She was quiet for a long time before asking if I'd been unhappy about helping them. I told her that helping family shouldn't require sacrificing your own future, especially when that family doesn't acknowledge or appreciate the sacrifice. Update 3. 6 months later, my sister reached out again. She'd moved back home to help with expenses, and her entire salary was going toward their bills. She'd had to sell her car and use public transportation to save money. She wanted to know if I had any advice for managing such a tight budget. I sent her the spreadsheets I'd created during college, showing how I'd tracked every expense and found ways to cut costs. I included information about food banks, discount grocery stores, and free entertainment options. I'd learned all of this while secretly supporting her lifestyle, and now she could use the same resources. She asked if I'd consider meeting for coffee to talk about the family situation. I agreed, curious about what she wanted to discuss. At the coffee shop, she looked exhausted. She explained that she'd never realized how expensive it was to run a household, and she was struggling to cover everything on her salary. She'd applied for a second job, but was finding it difficult to balance everything. She asked if I ever missed being close with the family, and I told her I was building a different kind of relationship with them, one based on honesty rather than hidden financial arrangements. I explained that I still loved them, but needed to establish healthy boundaries. She wanted to know if I'd consider helping occasionally with emergency expenses, and I told her that depended on whether they acknowledged that any help would be a gift, not an obligation. I wasn't their backup plan anymore. The conversation ended with her asking what I'd learned from the whole experience. I told her I'd learned that helping people who don't appreciate it doesn't actually help anyone. Real support means helping people become independent, not enabling them to avoid responsibility. As I drove home to my comfortable apartment, I thought about the graduation party 6 months earlier. The diploma that had felt so heavy that night was now framed on my office wall, next to a photo from my new job's welcome reception. The email I'd scheduled that morning had changed everything. Not just my relationship with my family, but my understanding of my own worth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling the people you care about and start taking care of yourself. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, thanking me for the coffee and the budgeting spreadsheets. She said she was learning to appreciate the value of money in a way she never had before. I smiled and put the phone away. Some lessons are worth learning, even when they're difficult. Especially when they're difficult.